Welcome back to another episode of the XRP podcast. Today, we're going to be breaking it down with Mickle. Of course, we'll be talking about news. We'll also get into the element of ETFs. What real impact is that having on XRP? We'll talk price and how the outlook is going forward into December. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. All right, back here on the XRP pod, of course, we want to first do a big shout out to one of our biggest partners that you guys may not be aware of, and that, of course, is Uphold. Uphold recently has just joined over to the XRP podcast, so you guys can, of course, learn a little bit more about what they're doing, which is the new debit card. This is a card that has the most XRP rewards available, a lot of benefits to get this card. What I would recommend, of course, if you guys are not already doing direct deposit, you should be. This is not a credit card, so there's no credit checks. And of course, if you're spending money, you're going to be able to get a lot of benefits from retaining XRP. I have looked at this in comparison to other cards. This is one of the best ones I've seen out there, especially the fact that you can earn rewards on a debit card. So you guys can, of course, hit that get the card button right there. I'll leave a link down in the description, and you can all become part of the Uphold community. It's going to be a awesome, awesome card. And I think this is going to be one of the bigger ones that's out there. Hey, I want to bring in, of course, Mr. Mickle. How are you, Mickle? How are things going?
I am good. It's exciting times in the XRP community. So great to catch up and always happy to come on the show.
Hey, we got to talk about all the great news, obviously, with the number of ETFs that have landed just in the last, 10 days, I guess. It feels like it's just a barrage of ETFs. We launched with Canary, Bitwise right on its heels, Franklin Templeton, Grayscale, all coming in, piling in terms of revenue, and seemed to be everybody kind of thought it was going to be a bad time, even though Canary opened on a down day on the market, but still ended up breaking all records. Can you imagine what that would have done on an up day?
No, yeah, that. And then one of the things you did notice is even though the market was going down, you did start to see XRP really ticking up against its Bitcoin comparative. So the
Oh yeah,
XRP to Bitcoin
huge.
chart looked really well. And the other thing I was pointing out to people is normally when Bitcoin drops, like it has been, you normally see XRP dropping at about a 1.5 to 2x
Mhm.
faster rate. And you really didn't see that. You actually saw XRP outperforming. So I know a lot of people wanted that vertical line upwards, but I think it was actually really important in terms of holding that $2 support, which we're bouncing pretty strongly
Huge.
off right
Yeah.
now.
Well, and that's the thing, because this is one of those things that when you compare XRP with other assets, and I think Bitcoin is the perfect example to the point you just made, is when Bitcoin does see market movement, the correlation to most altcoins is almost immediate. And in many cases, it takes a severe reaction into anything that's outside the top 10. Um, do you think that XRP has detached from the Bitcoin model in terms of price comparison?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fully detached quite yet. I think if you did see a huge sell off in the Bitcoin market, you'd probably see that funnel through the entire crypto ecosystem. But ever since the early part of, or the late part of 2024, early part of 2025, you really have seen XRP decoupling from the entire market. So I think what you likely have is you have the entire market kind of trading in lockstep during those normal noisy fluctuations where we're up 5%, down 5%. That sort of thing seems to work on the entire market. But then you obviously have XRP making these more large macro moves that it seems to be doing on its own. So
Yeah.
in a very similar way to how you see the S&P 500, where on no news days, the market sort of just trades up and down with the relative volatility of each specific company. I think you're going to continue to see that in the crypto market for a long time, but I think we are starting to see the market differentiate different places of value. And just looking at XRP's chart against most of the major cryptocurrencies, we can see that XRP has been vastly outperforming and really decoupling from the rest of the market. So I don't think it's ever going to be on every single day. Everything is moving completely independently because we don't even have that in the traditional market. But it does seem to really be holding its own in terms of its own fundamentals and having its own price chart and movements associated with it.
Yeah. Well, and you got to look at maybe the wave of these ETFs kind of piling in, bringing in institutional capital. But more importantly, it's likely that we could be getting a complete new investor as well, starting to look at XRP. This, of course, is just showing how Ripple lit up Times Square. And of course, I think the point being is that when you are this front and center of not only Wall Street, I mean, this essentially is New York. This is where the financial media is. It's where all of the major financial moves are made. And of course, Ripple continue to pretty much hit home runs up there. And timing wise, it was interesting to me, Mickle, that we saw this align right after swell. I think everybody knew when the timing was for ETFs, but in general, everybody was still looking at the potential and the possibility of seeing a market run. Of course, Bitcoin fizzled dramatically. My question to you is, do you think we're at a phase right now where the market could have seen its last dip before we see another blow off top? What's your position?
Yeah, so I'm certainly very optimistic on the price action we've seen thus far. I mean, we were kind of in this cascading pattern where we couldn't get a real strong bounce. We didn't really see any of that V bottom activity that's
Yeah.
typically associated with crypto. And it looks like we do have that rolling in. I've yet to see any metric that doesn't show we've reached pretty much historic levels of extreme selling. And while things can always set a new historic precedent, it just doesn't feel like, and I think you would agree, any of the fundamentals or bigger long term global sort of movements in terms of adoption of this technology are really coinciding with any kind of negative price action. So for me, we're off to a really good start on the current bounce we're witnessing for XRP. We finally sort of had that sharp recovery upwards, which is what I was personally looking for in order to start really
Yeah.
considering this a bottom. So I certainly think everything is looking really, really optimistic to kind of head into the next couple weeks and start to get out of the danger zone we're currently sitting on and start focusing more on sort of, hey, what's going to be that next big breakout move? So I think everything looks really good as of now. The market seems to be recovering nicely, and hopefully we've put a lot of that tariff and government shutdown drama behind us. And I think the market's currently in the process of really shaking all of that off.
I'm looking here as we speak. We're looking at the Bitcoin dominance, of course, now dipping to around 58%. This is another indicator that we're watching a lot, along with the M2, which is basically the money supply liquidity globally that's starting to pour in. When you look at that and then you look at XRP in general, this, of course, could give some indicator of why we see these little upticks right here. We're going to talk price in a minute, but I want to go back to the point that we're starting to see possibly uh, traders maybe starting to shift into the space. This, of course, was Dave Portnoy coming up from Barstool. He's been losing big. He sells into XRP, buys it at the right time sometimes and the wrong time others. But the point I wanted to get at here, Mickle, was are we starting to see major investors starting to take positions in XRP? Right now, they're cycling. And what I mean by that, they buy some, they make a little profit, they sell it, then they go, ooh, that worked really well. Maybe I should buy some again on the next dip and then sell it again. Imagine if these guys would just buy the dips and hold.
Yeah, well, I certainly think Dave Portnoy and the rest of these big people stepping in and bringing that media and
Yeah.
retail presence to XRP is obviously very important. For one reason or another, XRP attracts a lot of attention. I don't know if it's just people see that use case, it's just a very good ticker and a good looking cryptocurrency at the top of the leaderboard in terms of market cap, but it attracts a ton of attention. Now, what's really exciting to me is some of the institutional products that are really being rolled out behind the scenes for XRP.
Yeah.
Um, it used to really be if you were talking to any large desk in terms of perps or options, it was really only Bitcoin and Ethereum. And you're
Exactly.
starting to see some serious rollouts in these places in terms of XRP with some real volume hitting. Now, most of the institutions, they're using these different tools to hedge positions and in order to allocate capital strategically. And I think you're really starting to see some uptake in the sophistication of XRP trading on some of these larger perp exchange and things like that. So I think that's extremely optimistic. For one, showing that there's a huge retail presence and people like Dave Portnoy stepping in and just bringing this more
Yeah.
mainstream. But also, it's not just stopping at that retail. I mean, you're seeing very sophisticated institutional products being rolled out and starting to garner extremely high volumes competitive to sort of what we're seeing on Bitcoin and ETH. So that is a really good sign that it doesn't just go to people spot buying XRP, but you're seeing real institutional volume, which creates deep liquidity and a lot more liquid markets, which is just going to allow larger and larger people to step in. No financial institution wants to step in and know that
Bingo.
they're going to be making that entire market. They want to know that there's sufficient liquidity and any one of their moves isn't going to completely change the direction. So the more of the sophistication we see brought in, the more tools that are at people's places and those things keep creating deeper liquidity, the better it's going to be and the more appetizing it's going to be for larger and larger players to continue stepping in.
Well, and here's the interesting point to your, I think to your subject there is that when you start to see not only major personalities, but the size and the tenacity of the investor base, which I think a lot of people on Wall Street are now getting a taste of with the ETFs. And this was something that I noticed this just this last weekend. We did a private wealth seminar in Dallas. I went in there, zoomed in for a quick private wealth seminar, sold it out. We had 100 people there. There was 100 tickets available. Um, and all I talked about was XRP. And, we explained to everybody, hey, listen, we're going to be talking about digital assets and we're going to focus on Ripple and what they're doing. And, for the first 15 minutes of the seminar, a lot of people were asking questions about Bitcoin. As we were going through the slides of this is why you need to pay attention to what Ripple is doing, let's paint the picture for you. These are all mostly business owners and high net worth individuals. The minute that they started seeing the activity, and I'll just thumb through some of them that, of course, you look at what's going on in the market right now. Franklin Templeton jumps out there with an ETF. Of course, we had Grayscale jumping out there with an ETF. Uh, Bitwise, of course, going live last week. And then, of course, the success that we saw from Canary. And then you apply all of the things in terms of acquisitions. And I presented that case to 100 major investors. I had more questions. We hold these webinars and seminars in South Florida as well. I had more questions about Ripple, the company, than I've ever had before. I was amazed at how aware these people were about what was going on with Ripple. Do you think we're seeing a tide shift right now in major investors jumping in?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the things I've been highlighting for a while. The ethos and the investor base of cryptocurrency is about to change pretty
Mhm.
significantly. See, on Wall Street or in traditional markets, you don't see people necessarily allocating super large amounts of capital to something that's a meme sort of activity, right? A
Yeah.
meme trend. People like to see fundamentals. They invest based off of network growth. They invest based off of adoption,
Mhm.
real world products, utility. They want to see something there that is going to create staying power for any ecosystem. So they're going to be investing a lot differently than people in the past have invested in crypto.
Exactly.
And you can just see people's eyes light up when you start talking about a real use case for this technology. They suddenly get it. They can latch onto that. They can see it. They can feel it. They understand it. I mean, any person in business understands how terrible moving money is, and you bring them something like this and it instantly starts to make sense. I think a lot of these people who want to start allocating large amounts of money, they've had a hard time really seeing sort of what they're investing into or
Bingo.
what's the use case of buying this specific token. And I just think that all these new people coming in are going to see XRP, and I think that's really what you're saying, and they're just going to get it and have a high level of interest in it because it's so easy for them to understand and wrap their head around exactly what's being done here. And I think that plays massively into XRP's advantage as we start to go into a more institutionally driven cycle.
Well, the interesting point in our private wealth seminar, it was mostly the goal was to help people who had never invested in digital assets. So we were pretty upfront about, asking those questions. Have you ever invested in digital assets? Ironically, we had a handful, I believe, of plants in the seminar that were Bitcoiners. And as I'm presenting, of course, these guys are asking very knowledgeable questions about Bitcoin. And of course, we would talk about, well, this is great, but there's an infrastructure that isn't necessarily designed behind what Bitcoin is doing. And as we start to explain, here's Ripple's strategy. And when you look at utility being the core place of where the next phase of growth is going, all of the business owners and high net worth people that had never invested in crypto basically came to the defense of XRP and Ripple. It was hilarious how much they were going, well, wait a minute. Now I can put a company on this. I can put a utility on this. And I also can look at it from a speculative. He goes, it's like the triple threat here in terms of
And
value.
I think a lot of the Bitcoiners at the end of the day forget. I mean, the whole purpose of why Bitcoin was created was as a decentralized settlement network. And later on, it was kind of determined and I think seen by the community that, like, that's
Right.
not really going to work unless you
Yeah.
make substantial changes to what Bitcoin is. And it was kind of pivoted to the store of value. But that leaves that market demand for a decentralized settlement network wide open. I mean, it
Wide
was
open.
Satoshi's original vision, and you just really see that XRP has really stepped into this role and has been able to deliver on it. And I think the other thing that people need to understand is um, large institutions who spend all their time creating structured products, right? They're not necessarily cryptocurrency or technical experts on the back end. And they really benefit from having someone like Ripple create centralized software that they can plug into and take advantage of the XRP ledger without them having to be XRP ledger pros or
Mhm.
blockchain pros. So I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
being able to introduce kind of an easier step into their cryptocurrency journey is massively important. And I've just always thought Ripple's strategy upon introducing the XRP ledger, how they make it easy for people to step in and even use XRP without necessarily even knowing it, is going to be massive for large scale adoption of this technology. And I just think that really sits well with the investor base that is going to be coming into this market. I don't think they're going to be prioritizing the things that were necessarily super important to people who got into crypto in 2013.
Yeah. They're moving fast too into this right now. Our private seminars are sold out. I mean, I've put out 6 dates. They're all except for the last one. But 5 of the 6 so far sold out through the first quarter of next year. And I think you're right. We're starting to see a new investor class starting to emerge, some of which have been in whether it's been private equity, maybe they're a family office, or they're just high net worth people who are trying to figure out where to go with their money these days. That I think is a big deal. I want to jump to a question I have, and I wanted to share this with you. When you look at this right here, Mickle, you've got altcoin ETFs, kind of including Solana XRP. Obviously, these are in the green in comparison to what we've seen with now Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. So my question is this: as we move into next year, is it possible that these ETFs, especially the XRP ETFs, could actually become the darlings of Wall Street as opposed to Bitcoin and Ethereum? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people stepping into this market, as I talked about a little bit before, they're not going to simply rely on the narratives and what
Yeah.
people thought was the best before. I mean,
Mhm.
these people coming in are going to want to write their own ship. They're going to want to create their own legacy. And that doesn't necessarily mean backpacking off of what predecessors in this industry were looking at. I mean, we talk about all the time when I come on these interviews, the internet in its early days. It wasn't that you just backpacked on to whatever was the hot thing 5, 6 years ago, right? These
Right.
people came in and they started new companies, they invested in things that were different, and they really focused on what was going to make a serious impact in the market in terms of something that's going to be used. Because they understood that if you have something that's used widely and adopted globally, it's always going to have mind share in people's heads. If you have something that's just a one time sort of meme sort of thing or something that's really relying on a current narrative, but that narrative could go outdated. Those sort of things aren't sticky in society.
Yeah.
But when you have something delivering that real world value, it sticks with people. People are constantly seeing it. They're constantly seeing that utility. And that's what really creates mass adoption. And I just think the people stepping into this market now are going to look at things completely differently and have different preferences and have different things they find important. And I think you're already really seeing that lean into XRP. Through the seminars you're doing, I see the same exact thing. When I talk with someone who's new to crypto and I explain Bitcoin, explain XRP, and I'm a long term Bitcoin holder, and I know you are too. I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, but their eyes just light up. They see it with XRP, and I don't think that trend's going to change anytime soon.
Well, and the point being is that, crypto kind of works on cycles. The only difference is that, and this is one that we've been talking in terms of a narrative for about the last 6 to 8 months, is that I feel as though this cycle model has now just been, pretty much torn apart because of all the implications that we're seeing from other macro elements that are driving the market. And because of that, what's happening is I think it's starting to finally get in a position where it's a different kind of investor that is now looking at this, because it's not so much magic internet money. And now they're starting to see a real use case. But the bigger part is, of course, the regulatory environment that plays into this. So I would agree with you. Let's get into a little bit of price action. Obviously, we've seen a lot of people now in terms of sentiment turning bullish on XRP just over the last few days. What do you think is critical for Ripple, and I should say for XRP, to see a positive December? If we went in and just looked at the monthly charts on these and we see a positive December for XRP, what's it going to take?
Yeah, well, I think the ETF inflows so far in volume have
Yeah.
been outstanding. And I think if we continue to see those kinds of things continue to be outstanding, it's just going to keep attracting people's eye. I know a lot of institutions sitting on the sidelines who maybe not who haven't filed for an XRP ETF are
Yeah.
probably looking at these volumes right now and being like, what are we
They're going
doing?
to
We
give
were
it
going to
some
do
thought.
this in this quarter. We need to get this rolled out faster. I think you're going to continue to see more people feel like they're missing out on this, keep rolling out these ETFs, more structured products. They're going to see the demand, and then obviously clarity. And I think if you combine these two things, I mean, someone asked me the other day, just kind of joking around, do you think we're in a better time period for XRP? Do you think XRP is better situated than we were in 2020 or 2021? I think wherever it kind of peaked out at around the $2 range, very close to where we're sitting right now. And it's almost laughable. You were in the middle of the Ripple SEC case then. You didn't know what
Exactly.
the SEC was going to do. You didn't know if they were going to win. You didn't have any of these ETFs. I wouldn't have predicted in a million years we'd see an
Jeez.
ETF this soon. The fundamentals are off the chart in
Yeah.
comparison. And I still think XRP is extremely undervalued to where it should be trading on par with
Dramatically.
something like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So, it's just one of those things. I think the market's just going to keep getting hit with this positive news. And for one reason or another, XRP likes to close that gap in terms of sentiment with one big vertical line to the upside, and it tends to catch up pretty quickly. So I think XRP will continue to hang around. And then when people least expect it, boom, it will be at a higher price. And we'll be looking at this and saying, oh, wow, I can't believe people thought we were in a bear market, or I can't
Yeah.
believe X, Y, and Z. It's just the way XRP moves. It likes to move fast and quick. And that's one of the things that I've never found a good answer to.
I think we are in for some interesting news coming up in December for Ripple that is going to cause some movement, in the market. I'm just looking at this example right here. This, of course, is the 1.4 billion, almost 1.5 billion spike that we saw, of course, in the market game for XRP in general. But my anticipation is the end of 2026, there are some major situations brewing right now in DC. And as you know, we saw Trump trying to announce, this whole thing around healthcare. They're trying to restructure that. Whether or not the Republicans are going to allow that to occur with big insurance and big pharma. But the point being is that the administration continues to try to break down a lot of these um, old stalwarts of industry. And I think the banking industry is another one that will most likely see a lot of that moving forward. Mickle, if we were to see something like the Trump administration, and we've talked about this before together, of a true, refit of the American financial system, and Ripple were to become a true partner with the United States government, you think that would be good for? I know it's good for XRP in the short run, but is that good for Ripple and XRP in the long run? What's your thought?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I would kind of compare it to that I think is a great example is someone like a Palantir. They really did a lot of government work on the back
Mhm.
end, and I know a lot of people like speculate on, oh, the government could acquire Ripple or something. I don't think that's likely at all,
Yeah.
but I think Ripple could absolutely be a strategic partner. And all of these things, right? Like we talked about before, it adds so much validity to XRP. It brings so much more awareness, so much more presence. Like being situated next to the United States government, I mean, essentially puts this huge, huge certification and badge on XRP that other cryptocurrencies are always going to be struggling to achieve. And if you look at Ripple's connections inside the government, if you look at
Yeah.
it, their connections to the Trump administration, I mean, I think that would be something that would be outstandingly positive for the digital asset XRP and Ripple the company. And another comparison to that is really like what we're seeing on the ETFs. I talk about this all the time. When you have a ETF go live, it's not the SEC blessing that asset. It really doesn't mean much of anything other than the SEC is going to allow that asset to trade in an ETF. But the way people interpret that is
Mhm.
so powerful. They see it as this is validation. This is now a
Right.
sophisticated asset. This is now approved by the SEC, even though it's not. People see it that way, and it really changes people's mind share. I can't tell you how many people are like, "Oh, well, now there has this ETF, like, now I really need to own some. This looks like it's really gaining some traction in the United States financial system." So, whenever you can create or sit next to any one of these very powerful, important agencies and get a level of approval or, it just shows a level of sophistication that makes people more confident into stepping into any one of these assets. And being positioned next to the highest levels of the United States banking would be a huge validation to, I think, a lot of people in the XRP community in seeing those things take place, but also to people saying, you know what, I always thought this was impossible. I never thought this would happen. I thought this was just crazy talk. I've
Yeah.
been purely off sides on this. Let me get back on sides.
Well, and there's just a lot of factors that you look at in the structure of what's happening with the Fed. You look at scenarios that play into what we might see in terms of even a reverse carry trade with what's going on in Japan. I know, Jake talks about this a lot, and we may be getting closer to that. Obviously, with the yen, we were been reporting on that, but more importantly, I think is this shift now to both a Western and Eastern thesis that has been going on for some time. Obviously, China's choosing gold and the digital yuan to kind of move in that direction. The U.S. now starting to move into a digital asset model, which I think, with whether you believe or not that we're going to see the digital asset stockpile start to increase. But is that a potential once that, let's assume that Trump pulls the trigger and gets much more active on including more activity around the reserve, and I'm talking about the digital asset stockpile. Do you think that, because that could get into major banks, big businesses starting to look at going into these assets just because of what's happening with the US government. Would that be what is needed for maybe business and the broader major investment groups to go, or do you think it's still going to be a regulatory framework
I think a
that would
regulatory
require it?
framework is going to help a lot. I think if the United States government started to step in, people might be a little bit more willing to say, hey, maybe we don't need this regulatory framework to necessarily be in place right this moment, because if
Yeah.
they're doing it, we feel pretty confident that we're going to be fine if we push on this a little bit early. So I think that would accelerate it. To be honest with you, at this point, with all the movement we've seen, I'm convinced it's happening regardless, one way or the other. I mean,
Mhm.
how soon the government chooses to step over the finish line versus when this clarity bill passes, the momentum is so clear in terms of the adoption and in terms of people stepping in. It just seems to me it's a matter of when, not if. I mean, there's just too many people taking this way too seriously. There's too many large firms launching these products now. And now you're really getting into this position of people are starting to feel like they're missing out and they're late. Because it
Yeah.
used to be like no one's stepping forward, no one's doing this, so we can continue to do nothing and kind
Hmm.
of just say, hey, it's not there yet. The market demand, we don't know if it's there. The regulatory clarity is a little confusing. Now it's getting to the point where you can't say that anymore. So you're either moving forward, you're advancing your company, you're moving into this next generation financial system, or you're lagging behind. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of companies are really feeling now that if they don't start taking action on this stuff pretty quickly, they will be left in the dust and their customers and clients will go to people who can service them better with better, newer technology. And I think that's going to be a huge catalyst, whether or not we see clarity as soon as we want it or a little later, it doesn't matter. I think people are already taking those initial steps to put this on their radar, put it on their um, Q1, Q2 objectives in order to get those things over the finish line. And I just don't think they can really sit around much longer and push these things off.
Do you think, okay, so I know a lot of people will say, all right, well, we've seen Ripple and kind of their overall strategy in general as we start to see bank adoption. And when I say bank adoption, meaning we're going to have stable coins in banks, it's likely that we're going to have a lot of cross border payments that will start to implement within the banking architecture. But at the same time, you have to also consider Ripplenet because Ripplenet doesn't necessarily require XRP, to rotate. And when you look at what the growth is for Ripplenet and where banks are today, if we were to see more adoption on Ripplenet, which is kind of a sidestep there, I know Brad has been very adamant about saying XRP is at the center of everything we're doing. Do you think that would have any issue in the future around the potential use of XRP?
No, not at all. In fact, I think it's a massive catalyst. I mean, this is one of the things that I think everyone gets really, really wrong on the RippleNet not requiring XRP. I mean, if they required XRP to be part of RippleNet and we were in this really ambiguous stage of what clarity was, I mean, Ripple might not have a single person using RippleNet. I
Right.
mean, the important thing is to get people on the platform.
Okay.
You sell a better product, you get people on the platform, and then you say, hey, there's this way better option you can use on the platform to move money way faster, way cheaper, and it
Hmm.
gets done instantaneously. And then when people feel like, okay, I feel like as a company, we can take this next step because the Trump administration is doing X, Y, and Z. Government clarity bill got rolled out. There's now this ETF. Whatever their logic is, it will make them feel more comfortable stepping in. So the alternative was Ripple tells all these customers, like, hey, well, let us know when you're ready and you can come back to us. But instead, Ripple's been working with them, understanding the needs of that corporation. Hey, what else would you like to see if you ended up using this product? What are some other features you would require? Do you need things like clawbacks? Do you need things like KYC and AML? How can we build out this product section so when you're ready to step in and use it, it will address all your needs? And I always thought that was absolutely genius. Figure out exactly what these people need. Don't lose them as a customer. Build things that help them. And then you build trust, you build a relationship, and then you can take these things to the next stage. In my opinion, there's no question that digital assets and cryptocurrency networks are vastly more efficient than anything in the legacy traditional financial system. So, every one of these financial institutions, in my opinion, in the future is going to make that switch. And I'd rather have Ripple holding their hand and helping them with that transition and helping with them with that switch so they're led to XRP than Ripple essentially saying, well, if you're not going to do X, Y, and Z, we're not going to work with you and
Yeah.
slam the door. So I've always seen it as an incredible thing. And I think it's going to create a large wave of people ready to come in when they are, in fact, in a position internally where they feel like that's the right decision.
So you look at the global, because to me it seems to be lining up on two fronts right now. Obviously, China's front with the ECNY, this whole platform now is really built around a gold exchange predetermined denomination that's backing it. Then, if you look at what's happening in the U.S., which is Genius Act requiring stablecoins to maintain 100% backing of liquid and safe assets, which are treasuries, repos, etc. RLUSD is going to be part of that, most likely. And of course, the potential there means exporting US dollars worldwide very quickly and easily, almost overnight. When you look at the strategic advantage of that, do you feel like that is the killer app that can defeat the East?
Um, it's a very interesting question, and I do think that being able to export dollars over these digital rails is going to be a huge problem for the East in terms of ease of access and people
Yeah,
looking to get into these things. It's difficult because when you have some of these countries in the East, they can put in controls in terms of like, right, there's not even really Google in a lot of these
right.
places because they've essentially put up these barriers and it is decentralized technology, but there's a lot that can be done to essentially make it very hard to be able to access various technologies. To me, the bigger thing is that I think a lot of people need to focus on all of this division and separation is so important for a neutral, decentralized settlement
Bingo.
asset and liquidity. I
Yep.
always say this all the time. The worst thing you really could have seen for cryptocurrency technology is the entire world just getting along and saying, you know what, we trust the United States and we're
Yeah.
perfectly happy with the dollar. If the whole world just get along and everyone is like, the United States is great, we don't have any issue, we're perfectly happy using the dollar and using the Swift
Yeah, you
system
need the
and just
neutral
making them the
bridge.
boss, that would have been the worst case
Yeah.
scenario. But the fact that you continue to see people break off, make their own systems, create their own pools, segment their economy, try to become more codependent, the more it makes it absolutely necessary to have assets in a system that are hyper liquid, unlike gold, and that can be transported instantaneously. That are not owned and can be manipulated by one single party. So this whole movement we're seeing, it's weird. It's almost like deglobalization in a way, but at the same point, more connectivity because we have to
Yeah.
be more connected, but people don't want to be so reliant on one single person. I think that's exactly where cryptocurrencies fall in. Being able to hold and create liquidity, being able to transact with people without being codependent on any single counterparty. That's where this entire movement we're seeing right now is so good for digital assets. I mean, it's the thesis playing out right in front of us, and not that I necessarily like to see global tension and segmentation and a lot of this, but it's so important for the thesis and the success of why you need decentralized neutral assets that aren't controlled by your biggest geopolitical competitor.
Yeah, and I think you look at more of a complementary versus a competitive, situation that's brewing right now with the potential use of what Ripple is doing, especially if there's going to be a regulatory clarity advantage, because at that point, I think not only because the U.S. of course kind of guides a lot of what the geopolitical rhetoric is around the globe, but I think the opportunity there is putting Ripple in the center, which back to your point, a neutral potential settlement layer, which of course, yes, it is a U.S. company, but it's not necessarily dependent on any one nation or another. And I think the fact that they've grown so well in international partnerships is pretty huge. So,
Oh,
but we've only
absolutely.
seen, this is the other thing, we've only seen 3 or 4 countries launch these CBDCs so far. You saw, what was it, the Sand Dollar, Jamaica did it, Nigeria did it, mostly countries that absolutely needed to do it outside the yen, or I mean, the digital yuan. Do you think we're going to see major CBDC launches next year in 2026?
I think wholesale, absolutely. You'll start to see a lot of the larger central banks roll something out. I think they're going to be very cautious of not introducing it necessarily to retail in a lot of places. It might come down to the fact of like government stimulus, but I don't think I think it's going to be a lot of wholesale work and wholesale application in terms of global settlement. I think
Yeah.
that's the easy thing to be able to push out and not have a whole bunch of backlash and people freaking out about, oh, they're controlling my money, X, Y, and Z. I think global CBDC in terms of high level settlement, central bank to central bank, I think that's going to be the first most obvious use case for having a central bank digital currency. I think it gets a little stickier once you start to say, oh, and next year, are we going to be like getting rid of dollars? Or are we going to be forcing commercial banks and private banks to start switching over to this? I just don't think that's going to work in a lot of places. But I think
Yeah.
wholesale, you're going to see some big announcements in terms of the United States government. XYZ government rolling out a digital dollar, whether that just stays for global trade for them or that trickles down, I think it will probably stay pretty high level and then eventually start trickling down and get into more aspects of what you see in your normal retail or commercial business.
Well, and there's 137 countries right now that are in consideration of these things. The fact that we're still on track, even though I talked to Cody Carbone about this last week, we just put the video up today, guys, or I think it was yesterday. And he and I got into this whole issue of the anti CBDC uh, language that was going into this new act that they've kind of encompassed around the anti CBDC, and that is a must pass scenario. But the question was whether or not that would actually be included, if that language is going to be included before the end of the year. So I'm a little concerned about that. Do you think we're going to
Yeah,
have
I
any issue there?
and I take kind of a funny take on this because I think I'm against the vast majority of people in crypto. And I say I don't want a retail CBDC. Like I don't think a retail CBDC really actually does much of anything. But like, do I want the United States government to be unable to tokenize their currency and interact on a global scale with people they have to do business with? Would I rather have them doing that with highly efficient technology and digital assets? Yeah, absolutely. If it was just
Well,
like
as long as it's not forced on you,
exactly, yeah, yeah, yeah.
because
But if
right
it's
now
just
the
for the
US
United
dollar is
States to
forced on
conduct
you
trade,
for the
I'm
most part.
actually like, that CBDC is totally fine with me. As long as it's not forced on the retailer, hey,
Uh-huh.
you have to pay for things with X, Y, and Z. Like, to me, it makes a lot of sense for the government to modernize a lot of their high-end payment systems. And if the government wants to go create a stable coin quasi CBDC for doing cross-border payments with China or to pay for exports and imports, that to me is really not a big deal. And in fact, a change that probably has to be made. Um, I think a lot of the times the CBDC discussion ends up in this very dystopian place that we have to be very careful of. But I also think there are certain levels, especially if it uh, stays within the high level commercial banks. I mean, central banks, just for
Uh-huh.
interaction between country to country. I think there's a huge application for that, and I think they should upgrade their systems and start using things like that. So definitely anti-retail CBDC, anti anyone being forced to use any specific CBDC. But I do think government should be totally able to go in and digitize currency and interact with other nations because it doesn't really make a difference to any of us if they're able to do that, other than the fact that the government's operating more efficiently, they're faster, and they have better technology stacks to take advantage of the world we're heading into.
Well, and this is, this is more of, I don't know what would say the libertarian in me, but the point of legal tender when you get into too much government control, and could that mean that this would maybe give you the first segue into truly becoming a legal tender force? Because right now, you're not necessarily required by law. Actually, there's actually no requirement if you to accept American currency. You can actually accept trade. I know they've gone into organizations in the past where they've created barter systems and other forms of payment where they've deemed those illegal. But my concern is when you get it into a digital framework and you force it on the population, and then you can control it. That's exactly what the digital yuan is, which is, 2.25 billion wallets right now sitting in
Which would
China
be
that have
which
to
would
use
be
it.
the dystopian view
Yes.
that obviously I'm very against. Obviously, that leaking into the retail sector and mandates to use certain things, that's where things obviously become very problematic. But I'm a huge fan of the idea, and Chris Goncarlo talks about this a lot, and he actually is the one who changed a lot of my viewpoints on this. Um, which would just be the idea of a CBDC Bill of Rights. I mean, I think that for me is the most important thing that's not being talked about. Like, let's get a framework out there that protects basic freedoms, but let's also put a framework out there that allows people to stay competitive in a global framework
Mhm.
and use
Yeah.
technology that's going to be vastly more efficient. So I'm a real proponent of, rather than say an anti-CBDC stance, a CBDC Bill of Rights or something like that, that clearly defines individual freedoms, almost like we see in the Constitution, that allows always the issuance of private stable coins, right? Or
Yeah.
banks issue stable coins. Always allows people to go do X, Y, and Z on the private side. But he makes a very good point. If you just have this world where you only have private stable coins, right? and there's no government stablecoin, I mean, we don't really count on private companies to enforce free speech. We really rely on the government to enforce free speech. Funny enough, in the United
Well, I don't
States.
know about that. I mean, you look at social media, that's as private as it gets, and they are enforcing free speech.
Well, I look at
Maybe
people
or the
like
anti-free speech position.
no. But so what I see is like, and maybe we disagree on this. What I see is at least before X was a thing,
Well,
Facebook.
YouTube,
YouTube,
Facebook?
yeah. So private companies are going against free speech, and then eventually that's appealed really to the government who enforces free speech. So what I'm worried about is if you see the same thing with stable coins, right? Right now, everyone's happy about a Circle stable coin and they're unhappy about a government CBDC. But historically in the United States, we've seen that private companies have actually erred on the side of being super, super conservative in terms of stripping away freedom. So I
Mhm.
just think the counter argument is interesting there. It's something that I've
Well,
never thought of, but when you look at
yeah,
it that way, social media companies have been very happy to prevent free speech, and ultimately it comes down to the Constitution to protect that free speech. I worry we could see the same thing with stable coins, where issuers like Circle or these various issuers could be very happy to pull away freedoms or to step in and take control of these networks. You
yes.
kind of need something on the top end protecting that, almost like the Constitution does for free speech, which is where I come back to that Bill of Rights in a way.
Well, and I think, yeah, I know this gets into such a complicated
Oh yeah.
discussion. We'd probably go on for hours on this one because I'm very, very free speech oriented. And, being in media for the last 25 years, I've had a chance to see this where speech is guided for the most part by bigger organizations, and it's usually advertisers, unfortunately. We, being an independent media organization, fortunately get a chance to choose who we even allow in as an advertiser. But what I've seen more importantly is the amount if we do the wrong conversation on certain audio podcasts, and I won't say the platform that we see shadow banning occurring on, but it's happening. When we have over 1 million podcast subscribers now, and when I'm seeing shows that where we get a little bit dicey on the topic, and clearly something happened in terms of the downloads, this only tells me one thing, and that is that somebody is in these organizations are making decisions on what goes out and what does not. That
And
is
what
a problem.
a and I completely agree because I mean, I've faced the same exact thing, but all my issues with my free speech has always been between me and private organizations. It's never been between me and the government, and I look at stable coins the same way.
Yeah.
Are my issues going to be with private companies issuing stable coins? And if that's the case, does there have to be another global United States dollar that has a strong freedom framework that is always allowed regardless of what private company might be thinking on any given day? Like Circle
Or
could decide
does it
tomorrow as
just
a private
become a
company
digital
that they don't
asset?
like the Paul Barron show and they could pull it down. So what do we actually have in terms of real freedoms
Yeah.
written into the United States Constitution in terms of digital money? Because I'm just scared of putting all of that control into the hands of private corporations who can really do whatever they
I
want.
totally agree because I'm not a big stablecoin lover. I use them and it's a utility to me. It's very simple. You pop it in there, it goes into the need for paying a bill or whatever you need to move money around. Because right now we don't have any other method. If you're in digital assets, the banks are just absolutely too slow. And even at the point where we might see a JP Morgan coin or a Bank of America coin, then they're going to be closed ecosystems only to be able to do things within that. So that gets back to digitalized or digital assets and the decentralized nature
Yep.
of it, which I still believe DeFi will solve all of this. Now the problem is the issue that we deal with volatility, and I get that, but for the most part, I mean, you can't, in my opinion, you cannot put a price on freedom. I would rather have a freedom of movement for assets and take an 8% haircut. I'm already taking that 8% haircut anyway,
Yep.
every year on my fiat. So
Yep.
I get freedom and the benefit of this. Okay, I'm okay with that.
No, you nailed it. And then just for the audience, I mean, that's why this discussion of is RLUSD replacing XRP? It's why it's so silly. I mean, they're completely different assets with
Yeah.
completely different attributes. XRP will never have an issuer. It will never be able to be controlled. And in a world where that doesn't exist for virtually any financial product or asset out
Yep.
there, that is one of the most powerful things. And I think people lose sight of how powerful and important that is
It's
in a
the
world
reason I
where
got in
everything's
crypto.
controlled.
It's the reason, the decentralized nature of this. It has reset the world. The problem is, and as you know, Mickle, unfortunately, the average person out there right now just doesn't even understand it.
No.
Just that part of it. They don't even understand it, how much freedom it puts upon you. The minute they do, I think we're gonna see a revolution,
Yeah. And
dare I
and
say.
and in the same exact way, I mean, corporations are gonna start looking at this the same exact way. No one wants the counterparty risk. No one wants to be
Yeah,
relying on their biggest, competitor. These sort of things are going to be a complete shift in the way people look at
no doubt.
allocating and preserving capital.
Man, we're going to go on for hours, I think, on this. One good news is we're having Mickle coming back more frequently. So he's going to be on the show. You guys will get to see his lovely face there a little bit more often. And we have a lot more coming in terms of interview. Guys, you know what to do. Make sure and like and subscribe. If you're not following Mickle out there on YouTube, make sure and do that. I'll leave a link down in the description for you to hit that. And of course, subscribe, leave a few comments. We like that. It also helps get this information out to many others who are just entering this space. So we'll see you next time right here on the XRP podcast. Take care.